Hello, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. We're going to get started now with our webinar. It's a really terrific topic today in our cybersecurity webinars. It's about your cybersecurity program and who is leading it, you or your vendors. So we're going to get started. I'd like to introduce right now Steve Racing. Steve is the CEO and President of ASMGI, and he'll also be joined on our presentation today by Frank Yako, CIO and Director of Strategic Business Initiatives for ASMGI. So once again, if you have any questions, please use the question box on the lower left of your screen, and we'll get to those questions either during or towards the end of the presentation. And I'd like to turn it over to Steve. Thanks a lot.
Great. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We do have a great topic to cover with you today, and a lot of material, so I won't waste a lot of time. Thank you, Paul, for that great introduction. Today's webinar, who's leading your cybersecurity program, you or your vendor? So it occurred to me when I reviewed this title and was putting the material together, what does that really mean, right? Because there are a couple of different ways you could interpret that. And so I just wanted to share, just from my perspective, three things really come to mind when I think about that vendors really driving strategy at enterprises. And one of those is basically the technology, the tool is only part of the solution. So we're going to talk a lot about a holistic view to developing and implementing your security programs and solutions. But one perspective is that the technology and tool is really only part of the solution, right? So a lot of times solution vendors, they'll promise to solve your problem, but they're delivering a piece of technology that really addresses part of the solution. And a lot of times in my observation, they actually end up creating work for you, right? And a great example is, doing scans, whether it's external scans or internal scans, vulnerability or application or whatever. But, I saw a lot of solution providers that were, adopting tools to do assessments and various different things, and they would just run a report and, put a logo on it and hand it to the client. And it just always seemed weird to me that the promise is that we're here to help you solve your problems. And it really felt more like creating work, right? Are your vendors are they creating work for you, or are they actually solving the problem? And the other part of that of this item too is making sure that you're solving the right problem, right? If you're talking about vulnerability management, for example, is the problem really having visibility and knowing which vulnerabilities exist, or is it actually remediating them or mitigating them and getting rid of them? So we would say it's the latter. That's the outcome that you should strive for. So some good things to consider there. The other thing is that ultimately all problems that we try to solve are business problems, and this just kind of summarizes, I think, item 1 and 2, right? It's a people, process, and technology thing, and it includes all these various different aspects, right? Like policies and financial, and all of the things that we call a total solution, right? It's not just about the technology, and a lot of times, I think we get stuck purchasing a piece of technology and thinking that we're done, and there's a lot more to the equation than that. So I think it's a great topic, and I think it's very timely. But that said, before we get started, I wanted to introduce ASMGI for those of you who don't know who we are. ASMGI is a global technology services and consulting company, and as I mentioned earlier, we focus really on total solutions. And I think the key to us, a total solution truly encompasses people, process, and technology. It's not a new concept, but I think just kind of in the heat of battle, a lot of times both enterprises and solution sellers and vendors kind of lose sight of that. It truly needs to encompass all of those aspects. So how do we deliver total solutions? Well, we do it with IT software and cybersecurity solutions that generally help our customers plan, manage, and execute. First of all, strong programs as a foundation, right? Programs are foundational for us because they outline, they put the guardrails in place, first of all, and the outcomes. They should define the outcomes that you want to achieve. So they really drive everything else. And a lot of times we're doing programs, policy, and those types of development to meet a compliance requirement or various compliance requirements, but it isn't just that. We'll often make the point that it's really about fostering best practices across the entire enterprise. So best-in-class platforms and tools that drive value through adoption and shorter time to value. So we're strongly making the point that a total solution isn't just about the technology, but it is a very, very important element of a total solution. And we take a lot of time and care in selecting who we partner with, and it's very strategic for us who becomes a technology partner in making sure that we're meeting the objectives that we'll talk about throughout the day, throughout the webinar today. A security ecosystem model. What this basically means, and again, we're going to reflect on this some throughout the presentation, but basically when you put a solution in place, it should work well with the other solutions you have. And if you approach cyber from the perspective of building an ecosystem, then it's really kind of a whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? It's all of the pieces. They don't just solve a point solution or a point problem. They feed the entire enterprise and make you better across the board. So, and ultimately, what we believe in is achieving results and delivering outcomes, right? So we do that with a branded service that we call One Team. It's really everything as a service capabilities. And a lot of times, like if we bring technology to the table, we'll wrap One Team around it. So again, just to make sure that we're delivering a total solution, not just a technology platform. So we call it getting the benefits without the burden. So there's a lot of modern technology that's truly helpful and can really help enterprises accomplish their bigger goals. So those benefits we want to make sure you get, but a lot of times those benefits come with an incredible burden, a burden of learning new technology, making sure you have the right expertise in-house, the adequate amount of capacity and headcount, and just adopting technology is hard, right? So, and the way that we do that is our approach, we call it filling the gap approach, basically. So it's truly, and again, we'll outline some of this in the program today, but it's really about looking holistically at your organization and figuring out where your gaps are, and then the best way to fill them, right? Some enterprises want to fill the gaps internally, and some determine that it isn't really a core part of their business, and they want to move it outside the organization. So those kind of things. I just want to highlight, we had a saying at ASMGI that action equals the results, and I'm a firm believer in that. Like, you cannot achieve really any result without taking some action, right? So it's a really neat mantra about doing, the doing part of it, and we've really got a lot of energy around that. But that saying's really kind of evolved in the modern technology landscape, and again, based on a lot of the things we're going to talk about today, more towards orchestrated action equals great results, right? So when you can start aligning your actions with the business and the key strategic goals of the business, and you can tie point solutions together, right? So now you're building an ecosystem, and you can orchestrate those actions so they all work together to achieve results. I think it really kicks it up a notch, and it takes it to the next level. So that's just kind of a neat little internal mantra, I think, that we use to remind ourselves that it's really about doing. Anyway, I'm joined today by Frank Yako. As Paul mentioned, Frank is our CIO and Director of Strategic Initiatives. And Frank brings a tremendous amount of experience to the table, both on the enterprise side. He's been a CIO at other large enterprises and run IT operations and various different things. And so he gets involved at ASMGI a lot, from not just internal and kind of owning IT and operations overall at ASMGI, but also in our client-facing engagements and bringing his wisdom to the table to help leverage that. So welcome, Frank. Thanks for being here, and look forward to sharing your wisdom today for sure. And I'll be leaning on you. But what I want to talk about, basically, setting the tone for our discussion today. We're going to reference a holistic mindset and really looking at security holistically. And what do we mean by that? First of all, I want to point out that a holistic security mindset, it's risk-based. It is a risk-based approach, and in my opinion, I think most enterprises are really on board with the fact that cyber should be approached from a risk-based model. There's just too much to do, and you can't do it all at once. So picking the right things to do, or prioritizing and based on risk and various different things, I think most people are on board with that. The thing that's cool about this holistic kind of perspective or mindset is really that it's risk-based by default, because every decision that you make has got trade-offs, and the trade-offs show up at all aspects of the life cycle of that solution, and they all need to be considered. And again, I'll just reiterate that a holistic security mindset is really about developing and deploying total solutions that encompass, people, process, and technology. So again, some of these phrases aren't new, but it's interesting on like how to apply them and the challenges that show up when you actually try to apply these fundamental principles. So the opposition or the opposing mindset really is the point solution, or the vendor solution. And this, I should point out that we're not saying the vendors are bad. We work with a lot of technology partners, and I'll start from actually the last bullet item first here. Most vendors, they want you to succeed, right? They want to help you succeed. And I truly believe that a lot of the solutions that are available, particularly modern technology platforms, they're really architected in a way that can help you achieve your goals. The challenge is, though, is that the vendors, the OEMs themselves, they're just part of the solution, and they really tend to focus in on what they do well, and rightfully so. That's what they do, right? So, but the challenge is that sometimes the promises can be sound a lot like a total solution promise when really you're only getting part of it. And those are the kind of things that we throw flags up at. Is you don't just buy a piece of technology and are done. And hope is not a strategy. That's one of the things that we revert back to a lot. But vendors a lot of times are motivated to sell or solve basically their portion of the problem. But what about the total solution, right? And I'll just go back to what I said earlier. Are they creating more work for you, or are they actually taking work off your plate, right? Taking the burden off your plate to achieve the outcomes that you want. So, and then I'll just reiterate that this isn't about vendors are bad. It's just about owning your strategy, right? This holistic mindset is it's a mechanism in which you can own your strategy. So the question I think that it's important that you ask yourself is how do you make decisions, right? How does your enterprise, how does your business make decisions? Are you making point solution decisions or holistic business-based decisions? When you build a roadmap, so when you budget for cyber, and again, when I say you, I mean your organization, and maybe you have a part in that. But are you building your roadmaps based on budgets? In other words, are they cost-driven, budget-driven? We have this much money, and you need to basically protect our entire organization, right? So do the best you can with it. Or is it really based on risk? Are you taking a look at where the risks in the organization are and how you can best address those? So ultimately what that says is, are you coming at this problem from a cost-based mentality or an outcome-based mentality? And what we're advocating for is the outcome-based mentality. That really is the holistic mindset, the holistic cybersecurity mindset. So the question I would ask you then is, what if there was a way to build your program such that the business understood what you were doing, when you were going to do it, and probably even more importantly, why you're doing it, right? Why are you implementing this solution instead of this solution? So wouldn't it be cool if the business actually understood those things? What if there was a way to build a program where you represent what the appropriate budget is for the enterprise versus being told, here's the budget that you have to work with, go solve world hunger, basically, go protect our enterprise, right? and wouldn't it be neat if every solution that you implemented on its own, you could demonstrate the return on that investment, right? So you're saying, here's the budget that I need, here's the solution I'm going to deploy, here's the return I'm going to get, and then you can demonstrate that you're actually getting those returns. But in addition to that, it's not just a standalone return on investment. It's working well with the other solutions that you have in place. So you're gaining efficiencies across the organization just by virtue of that. It's a whole is greater than the sum of the parts kind of perspective, and you really get to achieve that. So wouldn't it be great if there was a way to do all those things and get those outcomes? And so the good news is there is a way, right? You can have those outcomes, and what we're saying is the holistic mindset, this holistic perspective to cybersecurity is the way to achieve that. So I joke around the first bullet item on this slide a little bit because, when I first said there is a way, yes, you can get this, I'm thinking through this and I'm like, man, this sounds a little bit like you can have all of this and it'll only cost you $19.99, right? So as sold on TV. It's not that. It isn't that at all. It's more like you can achieve these outcomes and get these outcomes. And really the key driver, I say all you need to do, but it isn't trivial. But the key driver is really think, act, do in a more holistic way, right? And so making sure that your actions, again, it's that orchestrated actions equals great results, right? Making sure that your actions tie in to the business and are all working together, rowing in the same direction, if you want to use that metaphor. So the other key point, I think, is that this is a value-based model. It's not a cost-based model. And we could probably do an entire conversation just on the differences here, but really what value-based thinking is about is not how much a technology or a platform costs, but what do I get for it, right? It's really more about the outcomes. And so then I go back to, let's start there, right? And we'll go through this in greater detail throughout the webinar, but it's really about starting with the outcomes that you want and then working backwards and building the operating model. So a couple of things I thought it would be worth just highlighting that sometimes cause confusion or at least can be ambiguous when used. But an ecosystem, what is that really? And I just pulled the Forrester definition, but an IT ecosystem is defined as the network of organizations, and I would include tools and technologies that drive the creation and delivery of information technology products and services, right? It includes customers, suppliers, employers, stakeholders. So it's, but again, it's just kind of a way to cement that. If you think about building an ecosystem, when you implement tools, by default, you'll be implementing tools that work well with the other things that you already have in place. Budget-driven versus outcome-driven. Again, I mentioned that, but it's a key concept to really think about because it's easy to think you're one when we are actually the other, right? So it's not, I'm not saying economics aren't important. That value-based is very much about the economics, but it's really about achieving outcomes and what the benefit to the business is to those outcomes and those types of that type of thinking versus just, hey, this solution, vendor A costs more than vendor B, so we got to go with vendor B. That's cost-based thinking, in my opinion. I think it really should focus on what outcomes. Orchestration, again, I already referenced that, but when your actions can align with a goal in mind or an outcome in mind, and then you can build an ecosystem and those kind of things and orchestrate your actions, you're really setting yourself up to get some great results. So very, very excited about those possibilities. And then, just going back to the vendor mindset or the point solution mindset, there's a lot of noise in the security space today. There are so many new solutions and vendors that have been around for a long time redeveloping their platforms and doing all these different things. It's really difficult to determine what's the best fit for your purpose, for your internal purpose. And again, I think it's critical to define those outcomes. But if everybody in the market says their solution is the best, how do you pick one? I mean, how do you really know? And in a way, a lot of times, I think it's less about it's less about which one you pick than that you pick, and you get something in place if you're using a total solution mindset. But it does matter, and as it relates to tying your actions to specific outcomes and those kind of things. So how do you really get through that noise? I think there are a couple key elements to that. One is ensuring that you clearly define the objectives, the results, the outcomes that you want, right? Which problems are you trying to solve? And then, making sure that you're considering all of the elements of the total solution. Focus on the outcome and make sure you're achieving that, not just one aspect of it. And then, the last one is just ensuring that when you do implement a new piece of technology, just make sure that it works and plays well with the other things that you already have in place. So how do you actually do a holistic cybersecurity program? We have a methodology that I want to walk you through, but let me just kick it over to Frank for a second. Do you have anything to reflect on, Frank, from what we've talked about already, or to set the stage for kind of drilling into how we actually do this?
Yeah, I think your points are definitely right on. The market's so fragmented right now, and there's so much noise that unless you understand what the ultimate goal is that you're trying to achieve, it's really very difficult to sort through all the vendor noise and all the different points of view that they have. You have to have that overarching goal of what you want to accomplish for your organization, as well as then understanding where the different solutions and vendors complement each other because there is so much overlap. So definitely having that overarching view and goal is critical to achieve that outcome.
Yep. No doubt about that. What about the time you spent, Frank, in the enterprise? I mean, did you deal with some of these challenges? How do you think the mindset, or how connected do you think the security team or the IT team was to the business?
That's definitely been evolving over time as security and risk have become more and more front and center, within organizations. There's even more of an opportunity to align the requirements of the business to the requirements that the security and IT teams have to accomplish. And that's really where it becomes critical that there is that ability to demonstrate what the benefit to the organization is of the programs that are put in place, to make sure that it's not just a technology play, because that easily gets lost when you're talking with different C-levels or the board within an organization. They're just looking at it from an economic perspective and maybe a brand perspective, but definitely not understanding all the inner workings of the technology. So that's where it's really important for the different roles, both CIO and CISO or enterprise risk manager, to help to provide that sort of guiding light for the organization, so that it's clear that the organization's achieving its objectives from a business perspective as well.
Yep. Yeah, I think a couple of the points you made, Frank, are a really good lead in to, how do you actually accomplish a holistic cyber program, and being able to tie your actions and your roadmap, if you will, your priorities, back to the business is a key element. So again, from our perspective and our methodology that we've kind of honed over, I'd say, the past several decades, right? It's a gap assessment, and for lack of a better term, I mean that applies to a lot of different things, right? But I think ultimately the approach is just get off the spinning wheel, right? So step back. Sometimes you have to take a step back to step forward and take a look at what you're doing right now. And so for us, we call that a baseline assessment. But the overarching gap assessment model is identify where you are today, identify where you want to be, and so that's the outcome, right? And this can be a big picture thing, but it can also apply to specific solution sets or solving specific problems, right? But define that outcome, right? So that becomes the future state, if you will, or the ideal outcome, and then build a roadmap to get from point A to point B. So it isn't rocket science, and I don't think it's new. But the interesting part is that it's becoming more challenging to be strategic, I think, about building roadmaps and everything. So we start with a baseline assessment, and this is really about just capturing current state. So that it looks at your current cyber portfolio, so the solutions you have in place and what you're currently doing today, and what kind of returns you're getting on those investments. But I think one key factor here is quantifying the results, and so we've been putting a lot of energy on this, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. We did an entire webinar on that topic, and we'll do more on that topic. It's very important, but to me, I think this is a very key way today for cyber teams to get closer to the business by speaking the language of the business and quantifying the results of these assessments. But just real quick, so there's a baseline assessment, and then that leads into building a program and a roadmap, including defining what outcomes you want to achieve. And from there, you evaluate the tools you have in place and or select and implement new platforms, or solutions. And then there's the operational aspect of it. And this is a part, I think, in a lot of strategic decision making that gets less attention probably than it deserves. But every solution includes an operational element of it. So I have this saying that, in concept, everything works, right? So it's one thing to sit around a table and talk about doing things. In concept, it sounds great, but putting it into practice and actually doing it, that's when devil's in the details, right? That's when a lot of the challenges come up. So taking the time to actually figure out how to operationalize these goals and objectives, I think, is a key part to a successful holistic program, and basically defining how are you going to achieve these outcomes, but demonstrating that through measurement. So a big part, I think, of optimizing an operational plan is by identifying upfront, here's the outcome we're trying to achieve, right? This is what success looks like, and here's how we're going to measure that. And the other point that I want to make from a cyber standpoint is don't forget about cyber insurance. It's a pretty hot topic in the market right now, but it's truly has an impact on how you as an enterprise or an organization manage your overall enterprise risk. And so we tag that as an item, and again in the breakout, the session that we did focusing specifically on quantifying risk, we talk a lot about cyber insurance as well as one of those elements. So step number one, the baseline assessment. I'm sorry, go ahead, Frank.
I just want to make a comment on the last slide as it related to the operationalize point that you're making. There's really a couple of things there. It's not just limited to IT or to security. I mean, there's things like making sure that we have security awareness training or end user awareness training, so that any tools that you're putting in place, those are understood how they function from a business perspective or end user perspective. Engaging the business on what it means to share or not share certain critical information outside the organization from a data loss protection program, making sure that that's in sync with how the business functions. Also things like business continuity and then even things like incident response playbooks and tabletop exercises that have to engage how the business works so that there is awareness of what has to occur when some of these things happen. Unfortunately, they're inevitable in some cases, but that's where that just has to be in sync with what's going on within the organization and the security and IT teams to be effective.
Yep. That's actually a great point, Frank. Really glad you brought that up, because it's, operationalizing isn't just about internal to your team or your group, cyber or IT, as you said. There's an impact to the entire organization whenever you look at this holistically. Particularly, you start to identify and address those tentacles, if you will, where you reach into the organization. So, yep, great catch on that. Great addition. So just to keep things moving, I wanted to go through each of those 4 steps in the how do we do this. Step number 1 being the baseline assessment, right? So the interesting thing about the way we do assessments, there are risk-based assessments have been around for a long time, and a lot of times you get questionnaires from your clients or your business alliances or trading partners and those kind of things, supply chain. And they basically, are interested in you filling out questionnaires and delivering SOC reports or ISO reports and those kind of things, right? But so what we look at is yes, using a survey, but also doing an internal assessment that's automated, and it tests against the CIS controls. And we'll talk a little bit more about why we chose CIS controls to base this assessment on. But then once we get the results back from the survey and we get the results back from the automated testing, we look at any gaps there, right? Any differences in the answers, and we'll have discussions and we'll talk about them just to better understand what's going on. And then all of this data is fed into a sophisticated AI machine learning model that also integrates several other data points, but outside-in assessment data, like from a lot of the services that are available, for example, to just kind of do outside-in looks at enterprises and various different things. But it also includes data from historical breaches and costs and what went wrong and just all kinds of things. So all kinds of attack and threat intelligence and data breach data feeds into this AI machine learning model, and basically quantifies those risks that are identified in the assessments and attaches monetary value to those based on data available. So I just want to highlight the importance of quantifying that risk, because one of the things that we're trying to establish with this holistic approach to security is really build a model that enables you to get closer to the business, right? So, and the way that we do that is by you learning to speak the language of the business. And one of the statements I always make, if you want to speak the language of the business, there needs to be a dollar sign attached to it, not a CVSS score, right? So those are the ways that you can speak to the business in a meaningful way, is you can speak about cyber risks in economic impact or costs to the business, or potential or avoided or mitigated or transferred costs or those kind of things. So, but the other key driver to, the assessment is helping to prioritize initiatives, but also aligning budgets with the initiatives that provide the greatest economic impact, right? So if you want to get the business on board, that's the best way to do it, in my opinion. So that's the step one baseline assessment part. And one thing about budgets and aligning budgets that I really like to point out, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on this, Frank, but in my opinion, it isn't really about getting more budget or less budget. It's about getting the appropriate budget, right?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's always a challenge of justifying your budget and how much funds you can secure for, either single initiatives or overall, and then balancing that against the other requirements of the business, whether that's to support growth or other activities. So ultimately, you have to be able to show that the solutions or the programs that you're putting in place are being implemented. There are actually outcomes, and that they're just not shelfware or something that is being implemented or partially implemented. You're not realizing the full investment or value that you've made.
Yep. So I wanted to move on and just speak real quickly about why is it that we chose the CIS controls to base this or execute this baseline assessment against. And I'm assuming most of you are familiar with the CIS controls, but if you're not, there's a link on your slide, and there's a lot of information available on CIS. But the thing that's interesting about the CIS controls, again, the controls themselves are probably not different than if you use a different framework. The controls are probably not a lot different, and that's true basically of most frameworks, right? And so the thing about CIS that was most interesting to us, and I'll just pull up the slide on the key principles that drove the development of this latest version 7, is basically it's a community of security experts, right? But the priority, you'll hear about the CIS top 20. Sometimes you hear about the top 10 or the top 6 or various different things, but they're broken. I'm going to toggle back a slide. They're broken into basic controls, and this has implications from an economic standpoint for a couple of reasons. But ultimately if you are breached or when you are breached, depending on how you look at it, one of the things that you'll be evaluated on is due care, and are you doing those things that you should know that you should be doing, right? Are you doing the things that you should be doing? So there are basic controls that are foundational, and every enterprise ought to be doing them. So I said foundational. Here is the next category. There are foundational controls that outline specific things, again, that for various different reasons can be in place. And then there are organizational things. These speak to a lot of the things that Frank mentioned a couple minutes ago, like security awareness training and those kind of things. But one of the reasons and the drivers for using CIS is that, one, they map well to all the other frameworks. So there are tons of choices in frameworks. A lot of enterprises try to pick a framework, whether it's NIST or ISO 27001 or some other industry vertical specific framework that's kind of really more geared towards compliance and those types of things. But CIS maps to all of these things really well. So that was one of the reasons that we like it. The other reason that we like it is that this top 20, it changes, right, based on the current landscape and threat landscape, and things are prioritized based on input from a large community of security experts. So it's pretty versatile from that perspective. And even though we base our assessment on this control set, it's very straightforward, I'll say, to map it to other controls frameworks and those kind of things.
So after the assessment is done, we take the data and help you basically put a roadmap together, or you put a roadmap together, right? So, and one of the key elements, I think, of building this roadmap is being able to prioritize these initiatives based on economic impact to the business. So again, if you want to rally the business or the enterprise around your roadmap, one of the best ways to do that is to be able to show the business how it ties directly to the economics of the business. So, and I think the other key element to developing a roadmap is providing actual costs. And again, from a total solution perspective, it isn't just, you need to do vulnerability management, or you need to do DLP, or you need to do identity and access management. The cost isn't just the license fees for the tool. The cost is truly building a robust program, implementing and executing the tool, or purchasing and implementing the tool, and then operationalizing all of it and all of the impact it has in other departments and those kind of things. But the platform and tool is a big part of it. I think in that you need to be able to achieve your goals with the tools that you choose. And again, taking a look at the cyber insurance, I think, is an important part in helping an enterprise manage their overarching enterprise risk. So just a lot of words on this slide, no doubt, but just wanted to bullet out a few of the things that go into really building a roadmap, developing the programs, procuring and implementing the tools. All of these things are addressed, how to perform the operations, looking at a gap-based approach, like filling in wherever the gaps exist in your current operations, program development, these types of things. So all good stuff, and it all goes into a roadmap, right? So now you have a roadmap, and your roadmap outlines, what initiatives you're going to execute, year 1, year 2, year 3, those kind of things. And then you need to make sure that you have a tool set that meets those goals. So if you already have tools in place, evaluate them against the things that are strategic drivers for you, right? The outcomes that you want. If the tool will do the work, there's no reason to replace the tool. Again, it's less about the technology probably. In whole, the total solution is really what needs to be looked at. Consider the ecosystem. So if you're collecting logs in a tool, for example, if you can't share them with other tools, maybe it's not the right solution for you. So really think about how do you leverage the benefit of a point solution or one technology platform in some of the other things that you're trying to accomplish. And that's truly, I think, how you architect an ecosystem perspective. Consider the full life cycle of the platform, the tool set. So maybe you have a tool set that's end of life. If that's the case, it's probably a good idea to replace it, because you really depend on tools to do their job when you need them. And again, as it relates to the tools, make sure you focus on the outcomes that are defined in your roadmap and those types of things. And then operationalizing at step 4. This, I think, is a key part of a total solution. And again, I don't know that it always gets the attention that it needs. And we're going to talk through an actual example of how to do these things. But when you look at operationalizing a solution, and I call it moving from concept to operationalizing is moving from concept to putting things in practice and actually doing it day to day, right? So think through that. A couple of the key areas that I think it's important that you think through are: do you have the right expertise, or do you have to develop it in-house or buy, outsource, bring it in from outside the organization, right? Do you have the capacity to execute and operationalize a solution based on your roadmap? You got 3 people in your security department or 30 people in your security department, and you need to 2x that in order to achieve an outcome. You have to consider those types of things.
Yeah, because the cost for that overall end solution, the technology, is just one small percentage of that. That's the thing that sometimes gets lost when you're actually trying to budget or get funding for a particular solution. You might pay for the technology, but unless you account for all the other things that are wrapped around that, then you don't realize the value of that technology.
Yep, absolutely. And I think just tying into what you said, Frank, is it part of your core business, right? So when you evaluate adding expertise or capacity, are you doing it as building part of your core businesses, or would the funds that you're going to spend on doing that be better used somewhere else, investing in other revenue generators or various different things? But all of those things I think should be considered in the operations aspect of a total solution. And then I also want to mention the cyber thing again, because this historically, I think cyber insurance has been really a one-size-fits-all approach, and I think it's really a tool in and of itself, and some risks are probably not worth trying to remediate when you could transfer them to a cyber policy instead. And I think really when you build a strategic roadmap, you should evaluate all of the options in dealing with or addressing that risk, and eliminating it by remediation or mitigation is not the only option. So I just wanted to point that out as well. We are running a little bit tight on time, so I'm going to move pretty quickly through this, but I wanted to actually bring a use case to the table, a real example to kind of help cement some of these concepts. And I picked vulnerability management primarily because of the ease of understanding. Most people, it's a basic control. It's CIS control number 3. Everybody probably already knows they should be doing it. Some people are doing more or less of it than they should be, but fundamentally, I think we all understand what it is. But before I dove into the example, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things about vulnerabilities. I mean, new vulnerabilities are coming out constantly. In fact, every 36 minutes, according to Gartner. Now, this is a little bit dated. It's 2017 data, right? So it's more than that now, I'm sure. But there are new vulnerabilities coming out all the time. But even at a new vulnerability every 36 minutes, that's 14,600 vulnerabilities per year. And these are just the ones that are known, right? But the other things that I think that are very concerning about these metrics is that on average, it takes 100 days to get a remediation removed from an environment. It only takes 15 days to exploit a vulnerability, right? So when a vulnerability becomes known, it is exploitable and actively being exploited in 15 days, yet it takes enterprises an average of 100 days to get rid of it. So there's a huge gap. There's a huge gap in between that. But those are just stats, and I just wanted to get those on the table because it's a very critical area of our business, right? But the life cycle of vulnerability management, and this slide comes from Rapid7, one of our technology partners who has a modern technology platform and approach to vulnerability management. I think that this life cycle model is really cool because it really addresses the full life cycle of a vulnerability. But you need to identify them, right, through scanning and reviewing and various different things. Then you remediate what you can over on the right. Some of them are out of cycle. Some of them can't be, remediated easily. They need to be addressed as standalone things like upgrading software and those kind of things, different change controls and various different things in place. But defining operational success and measuring against it, are you actually hitting your SLAs and those kind of things, I think is critical. And then evaluating your program overall and governing the program overall. So all very key aspects of a mature vulnerability management program. So let's just build a hypothetical use case around this and say, okay, so we do the baseline assessment and we get the survey back, and basically in the survey you answer, yes, we're doing vulnerability management, we have a program in place. But then the automated assessment finds vulnerabilities, in your environment, right? Your servers are not patched or whatever the case may be, it's finding vulnerabilities. So sit at the table and have a discussion and just try to understand what is it, what is it that's created this gap, and how is it possible? And so what we reveal when we have this discussion, right, is that while you have a scanning platform in place, it's difficult to keep up with remediation based on capacity. And the program that you have in place, it doesn't really include SLAs about how you remediate or how fast or quickly you remediate or those kind of things. SLAs and guidelines for classifying and remediating vulnerabilities are missing from your program. So again, this is a hypothetical situation, but what would a holistic approach to this look like? What would a holistic solution? Well, first of all, we would review your program, right? And the one thing based on this use case that I would suggest is that we get some SLAs defined, right? And maybe what that could look like is saying, hey, we don't have any highs or critical vulnerabilities in our environment for more than 60 days. No mediums for more than 120 or no lows for more than 180 days or something like that, right? But the key here is that your program should address what outcomes you're trying to achieve. And just having a scanner in place that we discovered during this assessment is not meeting these objectives, right? So in fact, these objectives aren't even defined. So getting the objectives defined is step number one, and making sure that you have that you have a program in place that clearly defines what the objectives are and those outcomes that you want to achieve. So then how do we operationalize this program? Well, and I just wanted to reference some of the challenges here. We don't really have dedicated resources allocated to this, right? So the same staff that's responsible for keeping the lights on at the organization, right? They have a day job. They're also responsible for vulnerability remediation. So we do it when we can get to it is basically what this says to me. We don't currently have enough resources to achieve the SLAs that we're defining. We don't have dedicated resources. I think we said that one already. Don't have enough resources to achieve the SLAs. We're only scanning quarterly, which doesn't work for these SLAs, right? So we're saying that security vulnerabilities can only be in place for 60 days. So clearly we can't check if they're there quarterly and meet that SLA, right? So all of these things come out and surface by virtue of focusing on the outcome. We're currently only performing patches for remediation, right? So we're not doing any of the out-of-band stuff. We're not doing any of the customized hard stuff. We're doing the patches. We don't have a sandbox for testing remediation, right? So we're creating a lot of risk just by virtue of pushing even just patches out to accomplish the remediation. So trying to figure out if there's a way. So what I want to share now is, so with these problems surfaced, should we go back and change the SLAs, or should we change the way that we do remediation? And the answer is clearly, don't change the SLAs, right? Start with the outcome in mind, set your business objectives, and build your operating model to accomplish those. So I think that's a key piece of this, and one of the reasons why I really wanted to do a use case, right? Because I see a lot of enterprises get stuck here. We don't have enough staff, we don't have enough resources to accomplish this. So we'll just change. We'll do the best we can, right? Best we can is not a measurable outcome, and it certainly won't meet most compliance requirements or those types of things. So anyway, it's important, I think, to build, actually I know, right, to define the outcomes first and work backwards from there and make sure that you're defining and architecting an operating model that will accomplish those business objectives. So I think the real answer is build a playbook that addresses these operational challenges. And you can.
Those might not be optional. I mean, there might be agreements that an organization has with their clients as part of their supply chain, that those things aren't negotiable. You have to be in compliance with those SLAs. So there really isn't any choice but to figure out how to achieve that outcome.
Yep. Excellent point, Frank. And from here, I was going to move into questions, but before we do that, is there anything else you want to elaborate on, Frank?
Yeah, the one thing, just going back to the really early on, some of the comments regarding the solution providers or the OEMs. I mean, the one thing that is important is that there is a wealth of knowledge with those different entities that an organization can leverage, and as far as knowledge about what problems they see across multiple organizations, within a specific vertical that they're providing their solutions to, or different size organizations, as well as just understanding, what they're anticipating and what they're investing in, so that you can understand how they're anticipating trends in the industry and whether they're even investing to anticipate those trends. So, going back to the comment of, we're not trying to knock vendors or anything, but it's just how you can leverage that expertise or knowledge to just understand how they could benefit, the investments, or you can realize investments that you made in their solutions.
Yep, that's a great point, Frank, and thank you for that. And it is worth reiterating that we're not here to say vendors are bad, because they're not, and truly vendors want to help you succeed as well. And one of the things that you mentioned is leverage, Frank, and it's worth pointing out, we talk about this a lot internally at our organization, is leverage versus dependency, and I think that actually is the difference between a point solution or a vendor-driven decision-making process and a holistic approach, right? You want to be able to leverage the wisdom of your vendors as well as the benefits of their platform, but you don't want to create a scenario where you're dependent on them, or you're just deploying the technology and hoping it will fix your problem. So great points for that. I want to jump into questions. It's 1:54. We have a time for a few questions, and thank you to those of you who posted questions. Let me just kind of go through here and see what we can pull up. So here's one. It's a great question, and Frank, I'll ask you to respond, and then perhaps I can reflect on it a little bit too. But the question is this: aren't enterprises already thinking holistically about security?
Well, I think there's quite a few organizations that are thinking about it holistically, but there are also times when it is just you're being in a reactionary mode. It's tough when you have competing demands within an organization to really take that half a step back and have even a multi-year plan and program, and making sure that you're executing against that. So the answer is yes. Some organizations do that, but a lot of organizations are in a very reactive mode.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with that, with your response, and I might just add a couple of things. I think a lot of enterprises are actually thinking holistically about security. It's not a new term; it's been around for a little while, and I think most security teams, including the CISO and the practitioners, would love to be strategic, right? But to your point, it's I think kind of the current reality, just by virtue of that, it's very difficult. So I guess where I would sum this up is saying I think a lot of enterprises are thinking holistically about security, but putting a holistic program in place is it's a completely different story, right? Thinking about it is one thing, but actually doing it is another. And I don't think not doing it is deliberate. I think not doing it is is just by virtue of the current reality that in the heat of battle, just trying to keep up. What I see in my observation from conversations with CISOs and security practitioners alike is that, there's a lot of just trying to keep up going on. And so I think what we're advocating for is, getting in front of some of these challenges. And so, catching up is the daily grind, right? If every day you get out of bed and you feel like you have to catch up, it's certainly not conducive to being proactive. So getting in front of those processes is what we're advocating for with this programmatic approach, and I think that's quantifying cyber risk and all the things that we talked about is one way that security can try to get their arms around it and address that. So let's see what else we have here. Okay, so how do you account for compliance requirements? We have a compliance requirement to do third-party risk, and I didn't see that on your list. So how do you work that into the mix? You want to start with that one, Frank?
Sure. So, again, looking at the program overall from the business perspective, has to take that into account. So, most of the CIS controls map to other frameworks, or if you have a specific requirement from a financial services framework like the FFIEC CAT, that can complement the CIS controls. And the goal is to make sure that again, you understand the demands of the business and that those are accounted for in the overall assessment that you're doing and in the program that you put in place. And that also includes third-party risk as well, because as many organizations know, they're part of a supply chain one way or another, either have commitments to their clients or are dependent upon other organizations. So you have to factor that into the overall approach as well. So yep. That's all taken into account in the way we look at things and yep. what we recommend.
Yeah, and I just want real quick, one thing I might add to that is that a lot of the tools that we use to accomplish this assessment integrate compliance requirements. So, for example, doing the assessment, we would ultimately identify company profile, right? So what industry are you in? What compliance requirements do you have to meet, and those kind of things. And then, so it is baked in from that perspective. But it's a great question because it highlights there are CIS top 20 is not an all-encompassing list, right, of things that you need to accomplish as a security and compliance team. That's for sure. So. And then that controls mapping that you mentioned, Frank, and that was one of the drivers behind, I think, the CIS 20 is that they map really well to the other frameworks. Last question. We're pretty much out of time, but I just wanted to get this last question in. What about automation? Is that part of modern platforms, and would it help us keep up with remediation? Part of modern vulnerability management platforms, and would that help us keep up with remediation? Any thoughts on that, Frank?
Yeah, I mean, there's as we mentioned, there's a lot of fragmentation in the industry, but there is a move for like the vulnerability management vendors to include some type of orchestration tool as part of their solution, so that they're not only identifying the potential vulnerabilities, but you can then apply and use those tools to do some type of automation to remediate those vulnerabilities and take some of that burden off the actual people aspect of things. So again, just like anything, you have to have the expertise to implement and take advantage of those capabilities, but it does allow you to eliminate some portion of the things that might have been done manually in the past. Yep.
And I might just real quick add to that it's not an end all, right? It's not a silver bullet, and particularly as it relates to vulnerabilities. Some vulnerabilities can't be remediation work can't be automated, right? But it is clearly a part of looking and optimizing an operational plan is looking at those areas that you can automate to create efficiencies and those kind of things. So we are out of time, folks. I wanted to mention one thing before we moved on. We are putting on a webinar series, and some of the things that we talked about today, we've done in covered those topics in depth, greater depth, I'll say, in previous webinars, and those are all available on our website, and particularly the quantifying cyber risk. We included a link in this slide deck. So if you want to see that, just please reach out and request that. And if you want a copy of the slide deck as well. And then forthcoming on Thursday, April 11th, we have a presentation or a webinar coming up with one of our partners, Flexential, which is a large data center company, 41 data centers nationwide or North America. And we're going to talk really about emerging trends in the data center space and what the value drivers are there for businesses considering putting some of their infrastructure in third-party data centers and leveraging data center partners' capabilities. So please join us for that if you're able. And with that, I will say Steve Racing and ASMGI checking out. Thank you very much for attending, and please reach out if you have additional questions. And again, the slide deck in this webinar will be available for download. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day.